glimpses into our past. Confucius, the wise sage from ancient times, whose teachings continue to influence millions to this day, tells us, study the past if you would define the future. In our talk today, I'd like us to explore why our history matters and what we can learn from it. So let's begin by asking questions that human beings have asked themselves since time immemorial. Who are we? What makes us who we are? And where are we headed to? Stories are a powerful storehouse of our responses to these time-honored questions. We are by nature storytellers, and stories are the stuff of life. The collective record and memory of our stories came to be called history. The Greek word historia originally meant inquiry, the act of seeking knowledge as well as recording the results of that inquiry. The accounts of events that a person might put together from this inquiry was called a story. So we can see that history and story have a shared lineage. In that sense, history is a recording of our human story. Today we have perhaps come to think of stories more as fairy tales and history as the record of past facts and interpretations. But as we know, history is not only a record of past events, figures, and developments. It is also a powerful repository of our life stories, our values, our beliefs, our ways of thinking and living in the world. It makes us who we are today. Even so, we might ask, what is the purpose and value of dipping into history? After all, it tells us about a past that is passé, about a world and its ways and frames of reference that are very different to ours today. So what is to gain from this navel gazing into the past, we might ask? Should we not rather devote our thought and effort to trailblazing our future? There is also the question of how we read into the past. We know that history is not simply a neutral record of the past. Far from it. By and large, history has been his story, in which her story is generally absent. It is a heroic presentation of kings and conquerors in which the vanquished and the ordinary people's voices remain silent. This is, of course, changing, but as we can see all around us, even today, on issues of race and gender, attitudes run centuries deep, and change takes determined effort and knowledge on all our parts. So it is critical to interrogate the historical record. Who is the author? Who were they writing for? When were they writing? What was their purpose in writing their work? What sources did they rely on in recording these events? The approach allows us to develop what is called critical thinking. That is, developing a discernment, a sharpness of how we view the past and how we examine and make sense of it today. It allows us to acknowledge and celebrate the successes of the past, but also, importantly, to learn from its shortcomings, to take lessons and meanings from our history, as Maulana Hazar Imam has often reminded us. This approach is called historical thinking, and we can apply this approach to everything we read and see around us, from the news on our airwaves today to reading the texts from the earliest times. Maulana Hazar Imam has reminded us to study our history so we gain a deeper understanding of our faith and its values. In his remarks to a gathering arranged by the then Ismaila Association for Pakistan, he said, and I quote, "It is very hard indeed to go through one's history without questioning things. and I am particularly pleased that you should do this work. That you, as my spiritual children, should go through their own history and try to understand the development which has happened so that you can explain to your children what is the meaning of Imam and what is the meaning of faith. So, with these aspirations of looking into our history to create a stronger, more resilient future, now let's turn to our past. Let's look at a couple of examples from our turning points in history and explore how Ismailis have fared through these times. What were the key challenges that they faced? How did they cope with them? In what ways did they develop resilience to adversity? And what foundations did they lay at that time to create a better future for us all today? Many of us have heard about the Fatimids. It was a 2.5 century period when the Imams reigned all across large parts of the Muslim world, as you can see from the map in front of you. The Imams reigned as caliphs, as supreme leaders across vast swathes of the Muslim world, from across the Atlantic Ocean to the southern Mediterranean lands and to the Red Sea and beyond. In thinking about this remarkable period of our history, let's consider what were the challenges as well as the milestones that enabled the rise of the Fatimids. The public pronouncement of our 11th Imam, Maulana al-Mahdi, in present-day Tunisia as the Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Imam al-Muslimin is all the more striking when we recall that for a century and a half prior to this, the identity and whereabouts of the previous 4 Imams had to be kept secretly guarded and were unknown even to most of their followers. We often refer to this period of our history as the Dawr al-Satr, the period of concealment, which lasted from the passing of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq in 765 CE to the establishment of the Fatimids in 909 CE. Let's remind ourselves of the broader developments that were also happening at that time. The Abbasids had displaced the Umayyads as caliphs over the Muslim world in 750 CE. They justified their legitimacy to rule through several claims asserting their family linkage to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. During this time, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq was already well known and revered as a descendant of the Prophet. He had the distinction of being a descendant of Hazrat Ali from his paternal lineage and of Hazrat Abu Bakr from his maternal lineage. He was an acclaimed scholar of Prophet Muhammad and the Imam's teachings, the Hadith as they are known. Learning from Imam al-Sadiq, therefore, was a unique prerogative that many scholars of the time sought. Among these, we have examples of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, who are known or who became known as the founders of the Sunni, Hanafi, and Maliki schools of law. The Abbasids therefore found it extremely difficult to challenge Imam Jafar as-Sadiq directly. But when Imam al-Sadiq passed away, things took an irreversible turn. The Abbasid persecutions worsened. The Imami Shia split into 2 major movements that exist to this day, the Ithna Asharis and the Ismailis. Most of the Ithna Ashari Imams were placed under house arrest, eventually leading to the ghaiba of the Imam, as they call it, the occultation. They believe that the Imam, their Imam, will return at the day of judgment. The Ismaili Imams were also in grave danger. They migrated from Medina seeking refuge in faraway regions. And eventually they settled at Salamia in Syria. As we can see on the slide, to this day, the maqams, the resting places of the Imams during Dawr al-Satr, are among the most frequently visited spaces for the Syrian Ismailis, as well as those amongst whom they live. Through these very challenging times when the Ismailis were in disarray, the Imams promoted ways of strengthening bonds with the Murids. Through the Dawah network, emissaries of the Imams, known as Dais, were dispatched to many regions of the Muslim world, such as Yemen, Bahrain, Iraq, Iran, India, and many other such places. The Dais invited the believers to the recognition of the Ismaili Imam and to teach them about the Deen al-Haq, the true faith, as imparted through the teachings of the Imams. They called for the founding of the Dawlat al-Haq, a reign of justice and righteousness, of good governance, by displacing the Abbasids and replacing them with the Ismaili Imams at the helm of the Muslim world. This was a daring vision in a dangerous time, and many Dais gave their lives for this cause. Let us pick up one example today. Dai Abu Abdullah Ashi was one such figure who pioneered the spread of the Ismaili Dawah across North Africa, in present-day Tunisia and Algeria. He was born into an Ithna Ashari family in Kufa, but he became convinced of the truth of the Ismaili mission and therefore joined the Ismaili Dawah. Our sources provide us with a vivid account of the Imam at the time, sending Abu Abdullah for training to Yemen under Ibn Hawshab, who came to be called Mansur al-Yaman, the victorious one of Yemen. In his Iftitah al-Dawah, Qadi an-Nu'man tells us, and I quote, Abu Abdullah was from Kufa. His name was al-Hussein bin Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Zakaria. He was learned, intelligent, religious, pious, honest, and respectable. The Imam sent Abu Abdullah to Abul Qasim, the chief Da'i of Yemen. He wrote to him, instructing him to enlighten him, guide him, and instruct him. Abu Abdullah was directed to imitate his conduct, observe the procedure of his deeds and the manners of his actions, to imitate them, to conform to them, and act diligently upon them. Then he could go to conduct the mission where he wished. End of quote. Following several months of training under Ibn Hawshab in Yemen, alongside many other Da'is who were sent to different parts of the Muslim world, Abu Abdullah set out for a pilgrimage to Mecca. There he met up with a group of Kutama Berber chieftains who had come to perform the pilgrimage all the way from Ifriqiya, which is present-day Tunisia and eastern Algeria, to Mecca. He overheard them speaking about the merits of Imam Ali. And when they heard him contribute to this discussion, they became convinced of his knowledge and of his piety, of his integrity. And they said to him, we would love for you to come back with us to our lands, to teach our children and our people about the merits of the Ahlul Bayt. Over the next 20 years, Abu Abdullah lived among the Kutama in the Kabilia mountains, dedicating the rest of his life to laying the groundwork for the Dhuhur, the manifestation of the Imam in North Africa. He was never to return back to Kufa again. During these years, Abu Abdullah's fame as a teacher spread far and wide. People from across the region came to listen to the Majalis al-Hikmah, the sessions of wisdom. An eyewitness source provides us with a vivid description of such a session. I quote, "Again and again he addressed admonitions to them and taught them wisdom. To this end he assembled them and he sat for most of the day. Every day he would sit for the faithful, talk to them and explain, and he ordered the dais to do the same. The women too participated in these sessions to hear the wisdom. We know from other records of the Majalis al-Hikmah that the women were active participants in the gaining as well as the transmission of this knowledge to others. In time, the Kutama learned the principles of the Ismaili faith, the necessity of allegiance to the Ismaili Imam from the Ahlul Bayt, and the mission of establishing a state where the Imam could initiate a reign of justice and righteousness. Over several years, Abu Abdullah and the growing body of Ismailis struggled to secure control over the towns and cities of their region. During this period, Abu Abdullah kept the Imam informed of the key developments, sending him offerings of the believers and seeking his guidance and direction. The North African Ismaili scholar Dai, Qadi al-Nu'man, gives us an insightful description of the discretion with which the messages and tributes were conveyed to the Imam living in Salamia at the time. And I quote, "Whenever Abu Abdullah chose someone for this task and had confided about it to him, he would not inform anyone of his family or children about it. None of them would know where he had gone. He would be lost in their view until his return. They would travel under cover in the condition of the poor and the pilgrims of the remote regions of the Maghreb, that is North Africa, in rags and worn-out clothes, until they had delivered to the Imam what was sent with them. Then they would return in the same manner." Meanwhile, events at Salamia, where the Imam lived, had taken a fateful turn. Maulana Radiuddin Abdullah pronounced Imam al-Mahdi as his successor in 899 CE. While many in the Ismaili Dawa rushed to pledge their allegiance to Maulana al-Mahdi, some questioned this claim and contested it. Among these were the Dais in Iraq, Hamdan Karmat, and his brother-in-law Abdan, who refused to recognize the authority of the Imam in Salamia, claiming that the true Imam was Imam Muhammad bin Ismail, who will return at the appointed time. These disputations reverberated all across the various regions of the Ismaili Dawa. It caused a major rupture, a major rift, and exposed the identity of the Ismaili Imam to the Abbasid authorities. As Abbasid agents hastened to Salamia to arrest the Imam, he was compelled to live in the darkness of the night with only his young son Imam al-Qayyim and a trusted servant known as Jafar al-Hajib. They would spend the next 7 years in these hazardous travels. From Syria, they moved to Palestine, protected there by a Turkish Amir who had given allegiance to the Imam in secret. At each stage, they were pursued by Abbasid agents who were hot in their heels. Eventually, they arrived in Egypt, and in Egypt, Jafar al-Hajib, a devoted servant of the Imam, was arrested and was questioned under severe punishment to reveal the identity of the Imam. Despite his wounds and his suffering, he refused to do so and kept the identity of the Imam protected. Eventually, they arrived from Egypt all the way to Sijil Masa in present-day Morocco in 905 CE. Meanwhile, it took another 4 long years after the Imam's arrival in Sijil Masa in 905 for Dai Abu Abdullah Shi and the Kutama forces to secure victory over Kairouan, the capital city of the Sunni Aghlabid rulers of Ifriqiya. Then they galloped on horseback for over a fortnight to reach Sijil Masa. With their gaze fixed upon the city gates, they awaited the Zuhur, the public manifestation of the Imam. Across the Muslim world, believers in various parts were also awaiting this momentous day. On 26th August 909, the Imam emerged. A voice rang out over the crowds of the Kutama tribesmen. O Mu'minin, this is my Mawla and yours, and the Mawla of all mankind. The momentous occasion for which so many had invested so much over several generations, laying foundations, building capacity and resilience through the most challenging of difficulties, had finally arrived. The age of the Fatimids had begun. Maulana al-Mahdi set about the task of creating the state administration, appointing Ismaili governors over the newly acquired lands, establishing laws and regulations, and laying the foundations of Mahdiya, the first of the 3 major cities that the Fatimids built in this period. The task of administering the region proved, however, to be much more complex and problematic. North Africa had long been inhabited by people from different backgrounds. Berbers and Arabs, Shia and Sunni Muslims and Khariji Muslims, Christians and Jews of different denominations, tribal confederations with staunch political and social linkages and rivalries. Developing a model of governance that could take account of all these shifting dynamics proved to be extremely challenging for the Imams, just as it had for all those dynasties who had ruled before them, as well as for those who ruled after them. Things came to a head 40 years later in the time of Imam al-Qayyim. Abu Yazid al-Nukari, a Khariji Muslim who belonged to a Berber clan that was opposed to the Kutama, gathered support for a campaign against the Fatimids. As many of us will recall, those who walked away from the Battle of Siffin in the time of Imam Ali came to be called the Kharijites. And among their descendants were those who settled in North Africa. Over the next 15 years, backed by the Umayyads of Spain, the rebels gained such momentum that the Fatimid authority was reduced to the gates of Mahdiya. Imam al-Qayyim passed away while the revolt was still raging across his lands. Imam al-Mansur took charge, led the Fatimid armies in person, and eventually he vanquished the rebels and their army in August 947 in the Hudna mountains of present-day Algeria. The long drawn-out warfare had taken its toll, damaging the economy and the social bonds among people. Among the first measures that Imam al-Mansur announced, therefore, was ways of restoring prosperity to the people and the land. In a Friday khutbah, which the Imam authorized Jafar al-Hajib, by now the elderly servant of Imam al-Mahdi, who had accompanied him from Salamiya all the way to Sijil Masa, to pronounce the khutbah in his name. He said, and I quote, "The commander, may God give him strength, has relinquished the dues incumbent on you in the coming year, in the alms, taxes, and all the obligations. And it does this for all the people, Muslim as well as the protected peoples, that is, Christians and Jews, out of kindness to them, and to aid them in restoring their land and steppes. So let those who witness this convey it to those who are absent. End of quote. It was Imam al-Mansur's handling of Kairawan, however, that became a hallmark of Fatimid governance. Instead of appointing the Ismaili governor over this city, as had been the practice in previous times, Imam al-Mansur, in consultation with the Sunni Maliki leadership of the city, appointed a learned and well-respected Sunni scholar as the city's governor. This became recognized as a momentous development in Islamic governance. It seeded the idea of an inclusive governance model, whereby a Sunni governor was appointed by an Ismaili Shi'i Imam to reign on his behalf over a major center of Fatimid rule. The principle of inclusive governance, by which competent people from a variety of backgrounds, ethnic, religious backgrounds, whether they were Muslim, whether they were Jews, whether they were Christians, all these could serve in the highest levels of Fatimid administration, became a blueprint of the 2-century Fatimid rule in Egypt. Lessons learned from when the Fatimids were at their most vulnerable phase became, in time, a key marker of their strength and resilience, of their fortitude and longevity. In referencing the Fatimid period of our history, Maulana Hazar Imam oftentimes reminds us of some of the values and attitudes that were prevalent at that time, over 1,000 years ago, and which are indeed as pertinent for us today as ever before. Among these, he mentions the role of the intellect and the critical importance of promoting cordial relations among Muslim communities as well as among other faith traditions and other groups that we live with. I hope you have enjoyed walking through some of these footsteps of our history with me, and that it sparks in all of us a desire, a curiosity to learn more, much more, from our deep and rich treasure trove of history and heritage. Thank you, and Ya Ali Madad.